Hi everyone. Today we're going to answer, or at least I hope we're answering a user question. Somebody asked me how we can get this effect for this cartoon tree. I suspect there's a custom shader involved here, which we're not going to deal with. But I came up with this, which is kind of my answer to that. And we're looking at it right now in Unreal. And we're going to do this in Substance Designer, and I just think it looks best in Unreal because I added a subsurface scattering to it, which you can't really see in the renderer in Substance. So I thought we'd take a look at it here. And if we go into the material itself, we're also going to look and see how to set up the height so it'll tessellate for us, and we can set the distance that our height moves. So you can get them really crazy. The problem with getting the height really high while it looks more leafy is even if you've got it set to not crack, once you start tessellating heavily, you start getting these cracks. Now in this particular case, because we've got holes perforated in here, it's not really that obvious, but like for instance right here, there's that little crack. But I think it kind of gets the job done. If you're careful about how you make your meshes, you could totally make this work. This little tree was actually a mesh from another project that I was working on, so it wasn't really designed to do this. It had its own materials, and I just went ahead and slapped on the substance that I made. So this is a totally doable thing, and you could totally crank up the height and have it do, look like leaves for you. So without further ado, we'll get into Substance Designer and we're going to make this little guy. Okay, so here we are in Substance, and this is what our little tree looks like in the renderer here. And this bark, by the way, I also just slapped on. It's the bark that I did as a tutorial a while back, so I will link this in the description of the video. So if you actually want to make this bark, you can do that too. The material here for the leaves, which is really the only thing we're going to be doing today, is very similar to the leafy ground material I made a while back, which is in fact where that comment / question came from. It's, in a lot of ways, it's actually simpler. And again, we're going to use an effect map. We're just going to have the one leaf because, it's like a single tree. But it's, it's pretty straightforward, and the magic really happens in the normals and the height. But, there's no magic here. We're just going to come up in here. We're going to do new substance, and we're going to call it shrubbery, and we're going to use the regular template. Before we start, well, first we're going to make some output notes, but before we even do that, it just occurred to me that I should probably show you guys how to get two completely separate materials up on this renderer. So we're going to backtrack just a little bit. No, we're going to repeat it up in here. I think rather than backtracking, we're going to relink this 3D mesh, and we're just going to do the process over again. So I'm going to link a 3D mesh. You can't import a 3D mesh. It'll only let you link one. And here's my shrubbery mesh. So I'm going to link that in. And under resources, I now have this shrubbery mesh. I'm going to double click on it, and it's going to appear in my renderer. Right now, I have no materials assigned to it. I have nothing going on here. It's just blank. What I am going to do is I'm going to get this environment squared away because I want to see it. I think it just looks nicer, and it's going to let us see the opacity that we create. It's very hard to see opacity when you have that blank background. Now in here I have opened up this bark, so I'm going to go to this mesh. I'm going to go to this graph. I'm going to right click on the graph, and I'm going to say view outputs in 3D view. Now I have two zones set up in this tree. I have a bark material and I have a leaves material. So it's asking me, where do you want me to apply this substance? And I'm going to say I want you to apply it to the bark. And that's where it's going to send it. Now once I have it applied off of here, I can go into any one of the packages that I have opened, and it's going to stay in the renderer for me. So now what I can do is I can do the same thing over here. So I'm going to say view outputs in 3D view, but this time I'm going to send it to the leaves. And we now have our blank material appearing on the leaves. So as we work it, we'll be able to see it happening on this little tree. And before we actually start doing that, we're going to add, because we have these new materials in here, each one has its own edit. And I'm going to set up my heights. And, you know, if we want to slide these around and do what we did in Unreal, we can, but I'm not going to worry about that too much because I think that the problem with this renderer is that it doesn't do, at least I haven't figured out how to get it to do subsurface scattering. And since that's kind of an important part of leaves, when I do shrubbery, I tend to check it more, you know, once I get the basics done, I'm going to fine tune it not in this renderer, I'm going to fine tune it in Unreal. Speaking of scattering, we need to make some outputs for that. So I'm going to bring my height next to my normal because that's where I like it. We're not going to have a metallic, so I'm just going to switch, I'm going to turn this into our scattering. And it gives you selection. I'm just going to go with scattering 0. So we have base color, normal, height, roughness, scattering, and we still need ambient occlusion. So I'm going to duplicate this guy, and I'm just going to change it to ambient occlusion. I don't know what I just hit there. If you ever want to make one from scratch, you can, just by right-clicking, add node, output. I tend to copy them because it keeps the group and I'm lazy. If we set, right now, nothing's happening, we can still see this material. And that's because these two nodes that we just added now aren't getting sent to the renderer. I can do it in two ways. I can view outputs in 3D view like we just did, and it would resend everything out. And these will now, oh, and we're going to send it to leaves. And it just went completely black because ambient occlusion is black right now. I can also do it this way. View in 3D view, leaves, ambient occlusion. If, like, for example, if I send this to opacity right now, it's going to disappear. Yep, why not? Oh, because it's set to opacity. Uh-oh. You know what? I'm going to just reset the whole thing. Yeah, it didn't want to overwrite that opacity. Okay, so we're going to fix this right now with a sort of a placeholder here. I'm going to just get a white, and we'll plug this into the AO, and that will fix everything. Let's begin actually building our material. I'm going to save this as shrubbery. And next we're going to go into our library. I think I called it, leaf. So we'll pick a leaf. This is the leaf I used the last time. Might as well use it again. I'll link the resources. I'm going to make it a grayscale. There's absolutely no need for it to be bigger than 512. And we're going to grab ourselves an effects map. Now, we're going to put it into the image input, not the background. And then I want to make my effects map also grayscale. I'm going to right-click on my effects map, and we're going to go into Edit Effects Map. Now, the first thing we want to decide is how small we're going to make our leaves. And every time we make a new quadrant, I'm hitting space, quadrant, it's going to give me a new quadrant, and they're going to get smaller and smaller. If you don't understand the concepts behind effects maps, I highly recommend you look at a couple of my effects map intro videos because I'm not going to go over how they work here. We're just going to go ahead and build this thing. I didn't put down in my notes how many I had here, how many levels in the tree. I think it was like a couple, 3. Let's see what this gives us. If we want it smaller, we can always scooch another one in there. Now, we're going to just create a just like a randomization of that leaf. So we want actually to have our pattern be our input image. Yeah, I think that's about the size that I had it, because this is going to be more or less the same size of our largest leaf. And then at the very end, I did put in a tiling, a tiling input so that you can actually make it smaller or bigger according to that. But this is going to be the biggest size we need, I think. Again, if you want it smaller, just add a couple extra quadrants in here. Each time you do it, it's just going to make that base image smaller. Oops, did not want to do that. Let's put that back. Okay, so what we're going to want to deal with here, as far as manipulating our leaf, is our offset, our size, and our rotation. And rather than do a separate function on each one of these, we're going to put it all on the color luminosity channel because substance reads from this one down. So we can actually assign variables. We can set variables in this first. We can set variables in this first function and have it give the right information down the line. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to create an empty function. And then we're going to click on that again, and that's going to bring us into that function graph. Now, because we're piling everything onto the first function here, we're going to have to use a sequence. And the last thing in the sequence, whatever happens before here, the last thing we always want to do is give the actual value for this, for this field here. So that's going to want to be a 1, because if it's a 0, it's going to have a 0 opacity. So I'm just going to put in the number 1, and that's going to work as our final output there. Right, so the first thing, let's take a look at, I'm going to do, you don't have to do them in order, by the way. I just do them in order because it just helps me keep them straight. But it doesn't matter what order you do them in. I'm just going to do them in the order that I see them here. So the first thing we're going to do is the offset, and we want a randomization on that, right? So we'll come back into our color luminosity, and we're going to get a constant, and that constant's going to be 1. And then we want a couple of random nodes, because we're going to create a float 2, and I want each one of these numbers, the x and the y, to be 2 different numbers. If you wanted your x and y to be the same, you would only use 1 random node. But we're going to use 2 different random numbers between 0 and the number 1, because that's how this node works. This node will give you a random number between 0 and whatever number this is. And we'll set that up, and that is going to be our position. So we're going to be sending this to another function, so we actually have to set a variable. I'm going to set a variable, and that is going to, this set variable, you'll notice that it's not specific, it's just generic to however many, floats or integers you have. And that's because it's taking its value from whatever its input is. So if I set this variable, it becomes a float 2 on account of it's getting float 2 information. So I'm going to call this position offset, and I'm going to copy this because this is a unique identifier, and we have to create a input in the actual offset. So I'm going to come in here, and under normal circumstances, we see all the variables available to us in these drop-down lists, and we just created a variable, yet it does not appear. And that's because set variables never will, and that's why I cut and paste, because I'm a pretty butterfinger typist, and I'm constantly doing typos, and it just saves me a lot of problems. So the only way to do it is manually, and that means we have to come in here and do an empty function, click on here, add node, variables, get float 2, and it's not appearing on the drop down, but if we paste it in here and set this as our output, it's going to work. Now, right now, nothing's happening because we didn't set it up on the other end. So I'm going to come back into my effects, I'm going to come back into my color luminosity. We can put it in here, set this as our output node, and we get our randomization. So that's the first one done. Next on the list is our size. So let's come back in. Oh, we have it up here already. And our size, we're going to kind of fudge. It's kind of the same idea. It's going to be randomized. So we're going to need another random node. I'm going to use the same number 1. Now, if we get a random number between 0 and 1, yeah, it could be at the bigger end of that. But it could also be much, much, much closer to the 0 end of that. And I don't really want my leaves, I don't want any of my leaves to be like super small. So I'm going to kind of limit how small they're going to get. And to do that, I'm going to get a comparison, and I'm going to get a lower. I'm going to get another constant. We'll get an addition. What else do we need? Oh yeah, absolutely. We need an if else. and we're going to set up a criteria for it. If it's smaller than, I used 0.2, but you can use whatever number you want. So if this random number between 0 and 1 is smaller than 0.2, that's our condition right there, then I want you to take this random number, I want you to take this random number and add a number to it. You know what? Let's go for the bigger. You can create another constant. You can create another float here, constant float, and put in whatever number you want. In my notes, I actually had it as 1. So they will actually go, my sizes will go between, 0.2 and 1.2 is essentially what I'm doing here. So if this number is smaller, if this random number between 0 and 1 is smaller than 0.2, then I want you to take this random number, that small random number, add 1 to it, and that's going to be my result. Otherwise, just go ahead and use the random number that was initially generated. And this condition, then, we're going to vector it into a float 2. I want my sizes to stay relative. If you want them to get thinner and fatter as well, you can create two separate values for your x and y, and that's, again, totally doable. I'm just going to have the same number. And then we're going to get another sequence node, and we're going to add it in. Before we do that, let's actually assign a variable. And we're going to set another variable, and this is going to be our size. So first it's going to do the position offset, then it's going to do the size, and then it's going to give us our result. Now again, it's not changing anything because we have to go back and do it at the other end. So I'm going to come in here, empty function, click on it, get a float 2, put my size in there, and set that as my output node. And there I have it. I think I might want it even bigger than that. So we can come back into our luminosity, and we can just scotch this number up a little bit. Oops, maybe not that much. Every time it's, I want to go above this little one, whatever that number is. Okay, because that's okay already, I think. So it's 0.3 is our number. And we have one more to do, and that is our rotation. Now here we see two numbers, but this is in fact a float 1 because this is giving you the same information in 2 different formats. And that is actually the easiest one of all because that is simply a random number between 0 and 1. Because it's in turns, your full turn is the number 1. So it's some number between 0 and 1. And we're going to create a new variable, and this we'll call rotation. And we might as well hook it up now. And then we'll come back into our effects and assign it in here. And this time we're just getting a float 1. Paste that in here, and we'll set it as our output node. So now it's a random number between 0 and 1 that's creating the effect we want. They're a little thin on the ground, though. So finally, what we're going to do is create an iterate node, and we're going to take this second node there, and we're going to plug it in, and we're also going to set it as our root. And then we can just kind of up the iterations until we get something we like. Probably like that. So that's the basic effects map. The way this material was built is in layers. We're going to be, well, it's kind of hard to see now. The philosophy behind it is that in the foreground we've got the biggest leaves, and then we have another layer behind it that are, obviously the same leaves, only smaller. And color-wise, they're also going to be darker. And then behind that, we're going to have kind of this very mushy way, it's not going to look like leaves, but it'll be all the same colors, and they'll be kind of mushing around. And then through that, we're going to have little holes. So there's essentially 3 layers, and they're getting smaller and darker as we go down. So we'll build our foreground layer first. Now, this effects map right now is really good for color because there's a lot of variation as far as the grays go, so we can get some nice colors happening. It's not going to work for us as far as opacity goes, though. You can, we're not going to use it. You can actually turn something like this into a mask if that's all you ever need it for by changing the global opacity by moving this number up. You can actually get it to be completely opaque. So if all you were making was a mask, you could save yourself a couple of nodes by doing that. But I want to have this one for color, and then I'm just going to make a separate one with a levels node that's going to be completely black and white, like that. So this now becomes a mask for anything that I do with this one. The other thing that I want to do is I want to thicken it up. I didn't do it via iterations for a reason, and that's because I'm going to get more control as to exactly what that image is looking like if I use a transform instead in a blend. Because what we can do is take a light and blend them over each other. I'm going to come back in here and I will flip this one 180, and then I can kind of just move it around until I'm happy with what's going on. I'm not going to rotate it. Well, you could rotate it by 90 degrees, but if you want to keep your tiling, you have to stick to 90-degree rotations. But this still gives me more control than I would if I just completely randomized it. So I'm going that way. Trying to think whether I want, let's see how it looks like with one more in the iterations. That's too much. Okay, so that's going to be our first layer as far as how much real estate it's taking up. We're going to do exactly the same thing to this levels. We've got one that's coming off the main one. We'll get another one that's coming off that transform. I just want to make sure we're doing them the same just to keep things simple. And now that's giving us a mask for that. So we've got, we've kind of got this parallel thing going on. And we can call this our foreground. Let's move this back a little bit. And let's get down to our next quote-unquote layer. So we're going to take these same leaves and we're going to get them smaller. Actually, we're not going to need a blend node for this. Yeah, we will. We will need a blend node. What we are going to need is a transform node. So I'm going to take this result of our big leaves and let's make it half as big, and let's flip it again. Let's flip by 90 degrees this time. I'm just changing them up. It doesn't really matter how you flip it as long as you stick to 90-degree angles. And might as well just duplicate one of these guys since we got our mask all set in. And now we're making a mask of the second, background layer. So let's make a little frame around that and we'll call it background. So we have the color version and the mask version for our background. And what we're going to need now is to combine our two masks, which will give us, we have to use a light and blend first, which is going to give us the mask for everything except for that hazy background that we're going to put in the end. So these holes are still kind of big, but it's got our pure white areas all done now. And everything that's going to be in these black areas is going to be probably some kind of either 50% gray with maybe just a little bit of black. But we're going to get to that part later. Now, I realized as I was talking that I forgot to put in an opacity output here. So I'm just going to duplicate this AO and we'll convert it into an opacity. And we'll change the label. And we can now plug this in here. We're still not seeing anything here because we haven't sent this new output we made to the renderer. So I'm going to click on it, right click on it, view in 3D view, leaves, and I'm going to assign it to opacity. And it's just popped those holes in there for us. So we're starting to get there. The next thing I want to do is start dealing with our bump, so our normal and our height. For that, I'm going to use a bevel node, actually a couple of them. We're going to hook up one bevel node to our big leaves, and we're going to hook up another one to our little leaves. So that's our big leaves. Let's get that bevel looking a little bit better. In my notes, I had the distance for this one at 0.03, but again, it's going to be whatever it is for you. But I do want a negative number because I want this bevel to be coming in, not going out. So find a negative number that makes you happy, because we're going to start to try building up, making little mountains out of these leaves here. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to up the smoothing. And let's see what the normal intensity here is. We'll leave it at 10 for now. We might want to up it later. And then we're going to do the same thing for this one here. Now, these leaves are smaller, so this distance may not be the same. Yeah, I'll leave it the same. Because, see, it's giving us these flat tops, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. I'm going to do stuff with that later. But I'm judging, I don't want too much of this flat space around. But by the same token, I don't want to lose the shape of the leaves. If I go down too much, I'm going to kind of lose that. Okay. So we've got this is going to give us sort of these big bumpy areas for our normal. I'm also going to get just a regular normal to height. I'm sorry, a height to normal. Got a couple of those. And I'm going to go into these original color masks. Well, I mean, they're not colors, they're grayscales, but they will be destined to be the basis for our color. And you see how different these two normals are. So, well, you can't, you're looking at the height map. Let's take a look at you can always see what that normal looks like, by the way, if you get a transform 2D and hook it up. So this one is giving us these nice big bevels, and this one is giving us kind of like these sharp edges and details. And we're going to combine the two of them. And we're going to do it twice. We're going to do it once for each one. And we're going to set these to overlay. So I'm going to take the bevel and put it underneath, and then I'm going to overlay the lines on top. So it's starting to do stuff to those like big white flat areas. That looks okay. And that looks okay too. Right, so that's the normals for the leaves themselves. There's going to be more, but for the moment I'm going to leave that, and let's take a look at the heights coming off of, oh, these bevels are in a different place than what I had them in my notes. And just pull them back a little bit so I can, right now they're looking exactly the same, it's hard to tell. Okay, let's deal with the height part of this equation. So I'm going to grab a couple of levels nodes, and we'll get the height maps off of each one of these. And then we're going to blend them using a copy blend. I want, this one's going to be on top, so I want to use that mask. And now we've got each one of these, you know, we've got this one poking through what's going on up here. Right now, their heights are the same, which is why I put these levels nodes in here, because I'm now going to just drop down this entire zone. I want it just darker. I still want it to have height information, but it's globally darker and lower than what's going on in the top layer. So this is our big leaves, and that's our little leaves that are being dropped down. And we can plug this into the height. It's kind of not going to show until we put the normal in there, because you don't really see anything. Let's make sure, first of all, let's make sure that this is set up. Yeah, okay. So that's set up, but because the normal's not in there, you can't, the height information isn't really reading. So let's get back to our normal. All right, so we've done the big leaves, we've done the little leaves. What we haven't done is kind of that mushy background that I was talking about. And we needed to make the height map first for that, which is why we kind of digressed. I'm going to grab a warp, and I'm going to grab a blend. And we're going to do exactly the same thing here that we did with that height. We're going to use a copy blend. We're not overlaying it this time. We're using a copy blend. And we're letting the same stuff poke through that we have going on in the height. So far this normal and this height are matching up. And now we're going to fill in the stuff that's going on behind, you know, in these holes here. So we're going to take this, the results of our, you know, leaf normals, and we're going to go ahead and warp it against this mask. And I had it set pretty low. Let's take a look. I had it 0.32. Anyway, something like that. So this is like, it's all fragmented and broken up, and I kind of want that, because I just kind of want this weird, warpy, fuzzy look to it that's going to be matchy as far as colors are concerned, and based, you know, kind of maybe vaguely the shapes, but it is a background. I just realized we never changed this, our parent size, so let's just up that to 2K. It'll make life nicer, and we're actually correcting for the size that we're going to be using it at. It does change. You'll notice it does change the way these interact with each other. So I mean, it still looks okay. I'm not going to worry about this until we actually start looking at it, as far as the details of what the normals are doing. But yeah, it still looks okay. And now we can blend it again over what's going on here. And we're using a copy, and this time oh, you know what? I just got this backwards. We're going to use this one because we're only talking about these areas here, but I'm going to do it like this because I want this in the white, I want that in the foreground, and I want what's going on here in the background. So in those very small black areas here, why am I not seeing? Oh, you know why? Because I forgot to move this. I can just move this now to get it to fill in that spot. So those areas are now getting filled up with that, you know, weird, wiggly, normal. And because it's not an overlay, I mean, it's just cutting through, so that's fine. Because I just don't want it to be flat. You know, the detail is really not important. Okay, so that is done. Let's make a frame around it. And let's see what it looks like. So that's our normal and our height combined. I mean, they're big, but we'll sort that out later. But I think it's kind of looking like we want it to look. It's starting to raise up off of the mesh itself. It's starting to look like leaf shapes. So far, so good. Before we move on to the color, I want to make a scattering mask because in Unreal we're going to want to have some subsurface scattering, and that's going to be based off of our color. It's just, again, we're going to want to make, you know, we just want to break it up so it's not matching our color exactly. And it's really a question of just blending up our foreground and our background color masks because they have the most variation. So okay, let's see. We've got, this one is our background, right? No, that's our foreground. Hold on, I didn't mean to do that. I want the background. I'm just trying to keep, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to keep consistent so I don't confuse myself. We've got our foreground, we've got our background. We're going to blend these together. Try that again. And we're going to use a copy blend, and again, we're doing that same thing where we're putting the big leaves on top of the little leaves. And now it's, we're going to just lower these down because I don't want this to be very bright. Lower this one down, and then certainly lower this one down. Because I want the leaves that are closest to me, I want to have the most scattering on them. The leaves in the background, I want very, very little scattering on them so that they drop back. Because if you think about it, if you're looking at a tree, I mean, you're not really seeing a lot of light passing through the leaves in the background. You're only really seeing the light passing through the leaves in the foreground. And it also has to be broken up. So I'm going to come in here and get a Gaussian noise, and I'm going to get another warp, and I think that's pretty good actually the way it is. I want to drop this back just a little bit. Yeah. So whatever our colors end up being, we're just going to pass them through this. And this is going to take whatever color mask we have here, and it's just going to break it up, and it's going to make it, you know, just less color, but it'll give us a good scatter. So we'll draw a frame around that, and we'll put it aside for the moment. And we can get to our color.